Hi, BookTube, and welcome to another fiction review. In my opinion, for what it's worth, there are many books that can take the reader to dark, frightening places where they will feel the shock, the dread of the thing coming, the terror of the thing being there, and the disgust. And this in itself can be helpful. I've watched a lot of creators who read more horror than I do, and they say the experience is cathartic because the situation is fictional and therefore safe. What I haven't encountered so often is a book that goes to the dark, frightening places and also reveals something beautiful. Not that the darkness is beautiful of itself, but I think the author demonstrates that beauty is a tough quality to destroy completely, and offering up the suggestion that finding and grasping even small amounts of the beautiful, or believing in the truth of one's own beauty, can be a lifeline in the midst of ugliness. Up until recently, the only author about whom I could say that they write novels that are horrifying and beautiful at the same time was Toni Morrison. Now I can add a new name. The book we're reviewing today is The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead, published in 2019 by Fleet, which is an imprint of Little Brown Book Group. Can I pitch this novel? I'm going to quote from a speech given by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in 1957 at Holt Street Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. My friends, we must keep on believing that unearned suffering is redemptive. We must say to our white brothers all over the South who would try to keep us down, we will match your capacity to inflict suffering with our capacity to endure suffering. We will meet your physical force with soul force. We will not hate you, and yet we cannot in all good conscience obey your evil laws. Do to us what you will. Threaten our children, and we will still love you. Come into our homes at the midnight hours of life and take us out on some desolate highway and beat us and leave us there, and we will still love you. Run all around the country and send your literature and say that we aren't worthy of integration, that we are too immoral, that we are too low, that we are too degraded, yet we will still love you. Bomb our homes and go by our churches early in the morning and bomb them, if you please, and we will still love you. But we will wear you down by our capacity to suffer. Dr. King wrote similar thoughts in his letter from Birmingham jail. Elwood Curtis is the protagonist of The Nickel Boys, and he sets out with the intention of aligning his life to King's admonition, to demonstrate his capacity to suffer without any loss of love. The Nickel Boys is a story which tests and questions that capacity, considers what truly makes it possible for any person to endure. Okay, so we'll look at the details. How long the book is, how I got it, how much I paid for it. The 2020 paperback edition is 208 pages long. I bought my copy the year it came out. There was a brief relaxing of the lockdown regulations in the UK during that summer, which allowed non-essential shops to open provided that they followed social distancing rules and they controlled the human traffic inside their premises. In the town where I worked, the bookstore opened. But when I say opened, I mean one person at a time could walk through the doors and stand in an area that was all cordoned off from the books. You had to start up a conversation with the staff and describe what you might like to read, and then they would go away and come back with a few recommendations. In the summer of 2020, of course, the Black Lives Matter protests were in the news and on my mind. I've wanted to understand the movement, and when I asked about that, the store clerk went away and she brought me back Wesley Lowery's History of the organization, titled They Can't Kill Us All. Now, I checked my copy recently and I can see that I've got a bookmark at page 98. So I need to schedule to finish that sometime in 2024. But back to the store clerk. She was very enterprising. Maybe she needed the commission very badly because she'd probably not been working for several weeks. So she went and she offered me some other books by Black authors, and that included Lem Sisay's My Name is Why, Bernardine Evaristo's Girl, Woman, Other, and Colson Whitehead's The Nickel Boys. I bought them all, and the price I paid for the Nickel Boys was £8.99. That's about US dollars $11.40. Time to talk a little about the author. Arch Colson Chip Whitehead was born in 1969 in New York. His parents were affluent, but he once described his father's temperamental personality as, quote, the weather in the house. So to cope when the weather was bad, Whitehead and his younger brother turned to comics, books, music, and games. Whitehead was reading adult fiction in high school. He quotes names like Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Shirley Jackson, Ralph Ellison. After graduation, he attended Harvard. His initial thought was to make himself a highly experimental writer, and just having had a quick look at reviews of his earlier books, you can certainly see that he was exploring different narrative forms. His first published novel, The Institutionalist, was speculative fiction. His second, John Henry Days, is a folk tale but also a satirical coming of age. Sag Harbor is autobiographical-ish, and Zone 1 is a zombie story. Whitehead's 2017 novel, The Underground Railroad, earned him his first Pulitzer Prize. The Nickel Boys earned him his second, making him only the fourth author ever to have won multiple Pulitzers. Personally, though, I warm to authors who are a little self-effacing and who use their sense of humor on themselves. And you'll see on Colson Whitehead's own website, I really enjoyed the last paragraph of his own biography where he says, he has taught at the University of Houston, Columbia University, Brooklyn College, Hunter College, New York University, Princeton University, Wesleyan University, and been a writer in residence at Vassar College, the University of Richmond, and the University of Wyoming. Apparently, he can't keep a job. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Regarding the setting, the book is divided into three parts, which mark changes to the setting. Part 1 is set in Florida in the Tallahassee neighborhood of Frenchtown, reputed to be the oldest black neighborhood in the state if Wikipedia has been correctly informed. Part 2 is set 65 miles west in the vicinity of Marianna, Florida. Part 3 moves in space and time. It goes north to New York City, and it's several years after the end of Part 2. Now, Parts 1 and 3, the characters are in urban settings. They've got communities around them where people are close by. In Part 2, we are out in the country on 1,400 acres of land set aside by the state of Florida for the running of a school. That isolation is going to be extremely important to the story. Colson Whitehead took inspiration from true events, and I'm not going to say more because I really don't want to undermine the dramatic impact of the novel. And it won't matter because if you buy the paperback version of the book, you'll have some author's acknowledgements in the back, and that's going to fill you in on all the real history. Regarding the narrative viewpoint and the narrative voice, there's a third-person voice in this novel, and it has authority, something like the authority that you used to find in a lot of 19th century novels, but without the arrogance. It is a voice that operates outside time and space, so it can comment on the present, past, future of multiple characters, all within the same section of text. And I'll give you an example. This is a passage from page 68. Rarely did Harriet make proper goodbyes to her loved ones. Her father died in jail after a white lady downtown accused him of not getting out of her way on the sidewalk. Bumptious contact, as Jim Crow defined it. That's how it went in the old days. He was waiting for his appointment with the judge when they found him hung in his cell. No one believed the police's story. 2 days prior, Harriet had waved to him across the street on her way home from school. That was her last image of him, her big, cheerful daddy walking to his second job. Harriet's husband, Monty, got hit in the head with a chair while breaking up a scuffle at Miss Simone's. Some colored GIs from Camp Gordon Johnston in a rumble with a bunch of Tallahassee crackers over who had next on the pool table. 2 people ended up dead. One of them was her Monty, who'd stepped up to protect one of Simone's dishwashers from 3 white men. The boy still wrote Harriet letters every Christmas. He drove a taxicab in Orlando and had 3 kids. The abundance you'll see in the text of short, simply worded sentences, I would say that lent the narrator a calmness as well as his authority, and I came to lean on that calmness especially during the tougher scenes in the book. Does this novel fit a genre label? This is a book I feel deserves to become a classic. It's a book that should be read because it cross examines American society around the time of the 1960s civil rights movement. It examines what did change, what did not, and what is difficult to change because it's difficult to forget. And I think it should also be a classic because its protagonists undergo an incredible ordeal, and the reader is introduced to different manifestations of courage and hope and personal redemption. It's a book that has all the big stuff in a small package of just over 200 pages. The Sunday Times called the Nickel Boys commanding, and I think that's a fitting adjective because the story is about how do you retain command of yourself even when you do not have command over much else. What, if anything, stands out as an aspect of this novel? What stands out are the real world events from which Colson Whitehead took his inspiration, and effectively he gifted those events with greater and longer lasting visibility because of the Nickel Boys. I think Sarah Collins made a point worth repeating. She wrote the introduction in my paperback edition, and this is what she says. But this book does ask us to think about what it might take not only to survive persecution, but to counteract it. It suggests that we must begin by first excavating the evil of the world and examining it. Or, as Colson Whitehead says in the opening sentence of the novel, even in death, the boys were trouble. Now you could probably predict the answer to the next question. Is there problematic content in this book? Well, just for the record, there are several graphic scenes with descriptions of physical abuse, torture, and murder. There are descriptions of psychological intimidation and solitary confinement. I would say, if we're going to talk about the context and purpose of that problematic content, the novel is practicing as much restraint as it can, realistically. The incidents Whitehead describes in his novel, they pale into insignificance if you look up the real stories written and spoken about by the survivors of the Dozier School for Boys in Florida. I've left a link to just one website in the description box. And finally, any suggestions for related or follow up reading? Well, Colson Whitehead hardly needs me to promote his books, but if I go by the reviews that I've seen so far on BookTube, I definitely must read The Underground Railroad. If you want to know more about the real life events which inspired the Nickel Boys, there are a number of books available. I recommend a Google search. Just type in Dozier School for Boys, and that's going to suggest several titles written by journalists or by former students. And that's another review done. I've recorded 3 videos today altogether. I wish I had more time to produce batches of content like that, but it's rare for me to have more than a couple of hours free of other commitments on a given day. Now, as you know, I like to head off in new directions with my reading, so we're going to be taking a detour into science fiction next, and that's thanks in part to Gareth at Book Songs and Other Magic, because he happened to mention the author's name. I hadn't heard it in a long time, and it got me digging around in the less visited corners of my bookshelves. So I'm wishing you all good reading in the meantime, and look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.